March 18th, 1945. 05:42 hours. Rhine Airfield, Western Germany. Cold fog clung to the concrete like a living thing, sliding in slow waves across shattered revetments and bomb-pocked taxiways. Frost glittered on the wings of grounded Focke-Wulf 190s, their once proud camouflage dulled by exhaustion, oil stains, and weeks without proper shelter. Somewhere beyond the mist, a lone truck backfired, and the sound echoed like distant flak. Lieutenant Karl Weiss, 21 years old, born in Bremen, son of a shipbuilder, stood beside his fighter with his hands shoved deep into his flight jacket. He watched mechanics struggle with a frozen starter cart and muttered a quiet curse into the cold. He had logged only 90 combat hours, 90 hours, and already the sky felt smaller, more dangerous, more hunted. The briefing an hour earlier had been routine. American medium bombers, slow, predictable. A-20 Havocs or B-25 Mitchells, the officers said, same as always. Grazing attacks, strafing runs. The Luftwaffe could still swat those down, at least sometimes. Karl's wingman had laughed softly at that. Flying trucks, he'd said. We'll be home by breakfast. Now Karl pulled his goggles down and scanned the pale eastern horizon. The fog thinned just enough to reveal streaks of rising orange sunlight and tiny black flecks moving far too fast for bombers. They were coming in low. Too low. The warning siren began to wail, not the slow, resigned howl of a formation alert, but the panicked, rising scream reserved for something urgent, something wrong. Across the field, mechanics dropped tools. Engines coughed to life in desperation. Pilots sprinted for ladders and canopies. Orders were shouted, but dissolved instantly into chaos. And then the sound hit. 6 Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines tore the sky open at once. The noise wasn't the heavy drone of bombers. It was a snarl. A predatory roar ripping through the fog at nearly 350 miles per hour. The mist exploded outward as 6 dark shapes burst through, wings level, noses slightly lowered, fast, sleek, impossibly aggressive. Douglas. A-26 Invaders. Karl had never seen one this close. They looked wrong, too sharp, too compact. Twin engines pulled tight to the fuselage, propellers scything the air into white rings. The canopy was smooth, almost fighter-like. And the nose? God. The nose was solid black with gun ports punched through the metal like the eyes of a predator. They didn't circle. They didn't climb. They didn't hesitate. They attacked immediately. The lead invader dropped lower, wheels of the landing gear revetments flashing beneath its belly. And then the entire runway detonated in white fire and black smoke as forward-mounted 50 caliber machine guns unleashed hell in a straight surgical line. Concrete burst upward like paper. A Ju-88 at the runway edge vanished in a rolling red-orange bloom. Karl flinched as the shockwave slapped his chest. The second invader followed half a second later. Cannons barking, tearing open a hangar as if it were made of thin cloth. Fighters inside ignited in sequence. 1, 2, 3. Fuel tanks rupturing, canopies blowing outward. Debris cartwheeling through burning air. This wasn't a bombing run. This was execution at full speed. Karl bolted for his aircraft as tracers raked across the apron. A mechanic fell 10 meters away, torn backward in a burst of red mist. The starter cart exploded beside the FW-190's wheel. Shrapnel sang past Karl's helmet. He climbed the ladder in 2 frantic steps, slammed into the cockpit, and dropped into the seat. Hands shook. Battery on, fuel pump, ignition. Outside, another invader carved across the field sideways, rolling slightly as it stitched bullets into parked fighters with horrifying precision. Its belly turret tracked smoothly, spitting fire into anything that moved. The rear gunner stitched a fleeing truck into smoking silence. Carl's engine coughed, then died. Another invader raked the fuel depot. The world turned white. The explosion lifted Carl's fighter sideways on its landing gear. The cockpit flashed with heat. The canopy spider-webbed but held. Pressure crushed his lungs flat. His ears rang as if a giant bell had struck his skull from the inside. The laughing stopped. Inside the lead A-26, Captain Robert Red Halverson, age 28 from Duluth, Minnesota, sat steady behind the control yoke. His eyes were forward, unblinking. No celebration, no hesitation, just checklists and timing. Speed 340, altitude 50 feet, ammo feeding clean. His navigator, Lieutenant James Carter, read off target calls through smoke and vibration. Secondary revetments left, fighters grounded. Red nudged the A-26 lower still, skimming above the grass. The invader's reinforced nose absorbed vibration as 8 forward-firing 50 cals vibrated the air itself into ribbons of death. Fighters died where they slept. Pilots died running. This was what the Luftwaffe had laughed at. A medium bomber, a flying truck. Below, Carl Weiss finally coaxed life into the BMW engine, but the runway ahead was gone. Cratered, burning, unusable. Black smoke curled upward like hands grasping for him as the invaders completed their final pass and vanished as suddenly as they had arrived. 90 seconds. That was all it took. 90 seconds to erase an airfield. And the Luftwaffe would never laugh at the A-26 again. 30,000 feet above the chaos, American trail fighters finally dropped in behind the withdrawing strike package. But there was nothing left to escort. No dogfight. No desperate German pursuit. Only columns of oily black smoke marking where a Luftwaffe base had existed barely 2 minutes earlier. Inside Halverson's Invader, the vibration eased as Red pulled the throttles back to cruise. The cockpit stank of cordite and overheated oil. Wind clawed at the canopy seams. Behind him, the rear gunner exhaled a long, shaking breath. "I don't think they ever knew what hit 'em," the gunner said. Red didn't answer. His eyes were still forward, because this wasn't their first slaughter. 2 weeks earlier, March 4th, 1945, 07:11 hours. Dijon-Longvic Airfield, occupied France. Rain fell in thin, slanted streaks across the runway, turning dust into greasy mud and muting the metallic scent of war. German technicians worked beneath sagging camouflage nets as if the front were still 100 miles away. To them, this was still a rear area field. Still safe. They were wrong. The invaders came out of the clouds at 360 miles per hour. This time, the Germans saw them coming and still couldn't stop them. Flak crews swung their guns too late. Fighters on alert tried to taxi, only to disintegrate before reaching runway centerline. The A-26s approached in pairs, weaving left and right, each one armed not like a bomber, but like a forward-firing assault predator. 8 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, 2 in the upper turret, 2 in the belly, 4 more in the wings for some variants. The aggregate firepower of 14 heavy machine guns on a single aircraft delivered at fighter speed. Runways peeled open, hangars collapsed inward, fuel lines erupted like torches. Any aircraft that survived the initial pass died on the second. German anti-aircraft crews called it Die Schwarze Wand, the Black Wall. The A-26 Invader hadn't arrived in Europe as a bomber. It arrived as a hunter. Designed too late for doctrine and too early for tradition, The Invader was faster than most Luftwaffe fighters at low altitude and deadlier than anything the Germans expected to attack from 15 meters above the grass. It didn't fly high. It flew inside the danger envelope, below radar coverage, inside flak dead zones, moving faster than reaction time. German intelligence reports filed it under medium bomber. The men who saw it up close called it something else: the Runway killer. Back at Rhine, Lieutenant Karl Weiss sat on an ammunition crate with his helmet in his hands. His fighter still burned behind him, magnesium flames dancing along the wing roots like demons feeding. His wingman was dead. The mechanics were dead. The hangars were gone. And the airfield commander stared across the wreckage in silent disbelief. They hadn't fought a battle. They had been ambushed by thunder. "We were told they were slow," Karl whispered to no one. No one answered, because no one had an answer. Across the Rhine, inside a temporary forward operating strip carved from Belgian farmland, the A-26 crews landed in sequence. Their tires hit muddy steel matting. Ground crews swarmed immediately, checking prop hubs, counting bullet holes, refueling at full sprint. There were no victory cheers, only pressure, only preparation, because the briefings never stopped. Inside the operations tent, Captain Halverson traced a grease pencil line across a rain-streaked map. Target: Giebelstadt, Würzburg, Oberpfaffenhofen, fields that still housed the last usable German fighters. The goal was simple: erase them before they ever reached the sky. Lieutenant James Carter leaned over the map. "They're bunching them close now," he said, trying to shield what's left. Red nodded slowly. "Doesn't matter. Close targets just make it easier." A younger pilot nearby, Lieutenant Tommy Vargas, 22, from El Paso, swallowed hard. "Sir, how many airfields are left after this?" Red didn't answer immediately. "Enough to keep us busy," he said finally. March 25th, 1945, 06:02 hours. Oberpfaffenhofen Air Base, Bavaria. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Alps. The last of Germany's elite jet fighters, Me-262s, sat under netting beside concrete blast walls. Mechanics slept in shifts between air raid alarms. Pilots were kept on strip alert rotation. They had been warned. They still weren't ready. From the south, the invaders approached at treetop height, climbing only at the final moment, just enough to clear the outer perimeter fence. German flak erupted immediately. Shells burst at head height. Tracers met nose guns, and the A-26s tore straight through the fire as if it barely existed. Red's Invader took 2 flak hits along the starboard fuselage. The metal frame rang like a struck bell. Warning lights flickered once, then stabilized. Target: Hangar row 2. He rolled left, nose down. The gun spoke. A Me-262 vanished halfway out of its shelter, ripped apart before its wheels left the shadows. Another exploded as fuel vented into open flame. A third erupted upward and cartwheeled across the apron in burning fragments. The Germans tried to scramble. They didn't make it. Within 3 minutes, Oberpfaffenhofen was burning from one end to the other. The jets never flew. Karl Weiss would hear about that raid days later. By then, his squadron no longer existed. He was reassigned to airbase defense, rifle in hand, watching the sky from the ground, like a man already buried. "The Americans don't fight us anymore," one soldier muttered beside him. "They erase us." In less than 60 days, A-26 invaders would rip through more than 80 German airfields. Some were hit twice, some 3 times. Some never saw an operational fighter again. The Luftwaffe didn't lose a battle. It lost the ability to fight one. And far above the burning lines of retreat, the invader crews kept flying, fast, low, relentless, until even the sky over Germany belonged only to predators. April 3rd, 1945. 04:58 hours. Forward strip. Lucky 7, Eastern France. Rain hammered the pierced steel planking as crews worked by floodlight. Engines warmed in low, vibrating growls. Steam rose from hot exhausts into cold pre-dawn air. The A-26s sat in rows like crouched animals, slim fuselages, wide-set engines, gun-black noses pointed east. Inside one of them, Captain Robert Halverson adjusted his shoulder harness while Lieutenant James Carter folded a last-minute recon photo into his kneeboard. Target this morning? Neubiberg Airfield, outside Munich, rumored to house fresh Bf-109s, flak towers, and a reinforced concrete fuel farm. Tommy Vargas climbed into the right seat of his Invader 2 aircraft down. His hands shook as he checked the hydraulic pressure. This would be his 6th strike in 8 days. His first 2 missions, he'd been sick afterward. The 3rd, he couldn't sleep. By the 5th, the sickness had disappeared. That scared him most of all. Outside, Ground Chief Sergeant Lou Berrigan slapped the side of Halverson's fuselage. "You're clean and full, Red. Try not to bring the whole damn war back with you again." Red gave a short nod, already half inside the mission. From the outside, the A-26 looked almost elegant. From the inside, it was a vibrating metal coffin wrapped around engines about to detonate controlled explosions 2,800 times per minute. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800s roared to full power as Red advanced the throttles. The aircraft lunged forward, tail lifting almost immediately. The Invader didn't roll. It launched. Takeoff speed came fast, too fast for fear to catch up. Red lifted the nose. The aircraft skipped once, then climbed into the dark. Formation assembled at low altitude, cruising barely 50 feet above field lines and hedgerows. Tree shadows whipped beneath the fuselage. Villages flashed past like ghosts. At 330 miles per hour, there was no margin for indecision. Inside Neubiberg, German radar picked up nothing. Too low, too fast, too late. Lieutenant Erich Schulte, 23, from Dusseldorf, was halfway through pre-flight on his Bf-109 when the perimeter siren began screaming at a pitch wrong enough to mean disaster. He looked up. The sky was empty. Then it split open. Invaders erupted over the hangars like black knives, engines screaming, gunfire already flashing. The first burst walked through the flight line and tore 3 109s to scrap in less than a second. Schulte ran. He didn't know where to go. The ground folded behind him as 1,000-pound bombs dropped low and fast, detonating the fuel farm in a single thunderclap that rolled across the Bavarian plain like the voice of God. From the belly of Red's Invader, the gunner tracked a fleeing maintenance truck and cut it neatly in half. From the dorsal turret, tracers chased anti-aircraft crews diving for their pits. The Invader was not just fast, it was armored. 8 crew armor plates shielded the cockpit and belly. Self-sealing tanks drank fuel without bleeding it. Redundant hydraulics kept the controls alive, even through flak tears that would have crippled earlier bombers. This aircraft was built to stay in the fire and stay killing. Flak finally found its range. A black burst clipped Vargas's right engine. The R-2800 shuddered violently, coughing smoke. Oil pressure plummeted. The aircraft yawed hard left. "Feather it!" Vargas shouted. His pilot snapped the prop into feather. The dead engine stilled instantly. The Invader staggered, but stayed airborne, flying level on a single engine at 200 feet above the ground, while bullets and flak stitched invisible lines around the cockpit. A 20mm shell punched through the nose, missed Vargas's knees by inches. The guns never stopped firing. They completed the pass. They escaped. and they left Neubiberg in ruins. Back in the airspace above southern Germany, something new happened. A single Bf-109 broke free from another airfield farther north, launched blindly into the smoke. It climbed straight toward the retreating A-26s. Desperate, angry. Too late. Red saw the shape climbing. He banked gently. The rear gunner rotated into position. The 109 closed to 800 yards and fired long-range deflection shots, tracers sliding wide behind the retreating invader. At 600 yards, the turret answered. At 500, the 109's wing root disintegrated. The fighter rolled once, twice, and vanished in a fireball over a burning airfield that had already died. By mid-April, the Germans no longer tried to intercept the invaders at low altitude. They saved their fighters for last stands against heavy bombers. The A-26s had become ghosts, appearing without warning, striking without permission, departing faster than fear could spread. The predator had learned its territory, and the prey was running out of places to hide. April 17th, 1945. 05:36 hours. Pilsen Airfield, Western Czechoslovakia. The night rain had stopped minutes before dawn. Steam lifted off the concrete in pale veils. The base had been quiet for 3 days. Too quiet. What remained of its fighter wing sat dispersed beneath trees, inside forests, even beneath camouflaged nets stretched across abandoned barns. Pilot Oberleutnant Franz Keller, 26, veteran of the Eastern Front, leaned against his Messerschmitt Bf-109 and drank bitter black coffee from a dented tin cup. His eyes never left the eastern sky. He had learned. Everyone had. When the invaders came, they never came alone. They came with speed. They came with surprise. And they came to kill everything that couldn't fly. The warning siren howled. Not long, not gradual. Instant panic. "Alarm start! Sofort!" someone screamed. Keller dropped his cup and ran. The invaders burst through the morning mist before the ground crews reached their aircraft. Tracers walked through the tree line where 2 fighters were hidden, tearing both apart before propellers even turned. A fuel truck exploded beside a camouflaged revetment, flipping a 109 onto its back in burning pieces. This time, they would get airborne. Keller vaulted into his cockpit as bullets hammered the dirt around him. His mechanic ripped away the starter cart and slapped the fuselage. "Go! Go!" The DB-605 howled to life. Smoke poured from the exhaust as Keller dumped the throttle forward. He bounced over torn earth, swerved around wreckage, and lifted through debris and fire into open sky. Below, the invaders carved the base open in disciplined waves. Runway, hangars, fuel, barracks, one after another. Keller climbed through smoke at full power, engines screaming, airspeed alive at last. He saw one invader pull up alone after a strike pass, its right engine smoking faintly. A wounded predator. His heart locked. He rolled into attack. Inside the damaged A-26, it was Lieutenant Tommy Vargas's aircraft again. Oil pressure on the right engine flickered dangerously low. Vapors streamed past the canopy in oily ribbons. The invader could still fly, but not fast enough to outrun a fighter now. Rear Gunner Sergeant Iron McKay shouted over the intercom, "Bandit, 6 o'clock, climbing fast." Vargas felt his stomach drop. Red's invader was already miles ahead, covering the rest of the flight. They were on their own. Keller fired from long range. Tracers streaked wide. Too fast, too panicked. He corrected. Closed. 300 yards. One burst hammered into Vargas's tail section. Control cables snapped. The aircraft shuddered violently. Vargas fought the yoke. McKay fired. The turret barked in disciplined 2-second bursts. The 109 sliced through the stream of bullets, whipped past beneath the invader's belly, and zoomed upward in a classic fighter pass. Keller grinned. He had them. The second pass was chaos. Keller cut speed at the top of his climb and dropped straight into Vargas's rear quarter. He fired at point-blank range. The A-26 exploded with impacts. Glass shattered. Hydraulics bled pressure. An electrical flash knocked out the cockpit lights in a violent pop. The right engine began to burn. "Bail out! Bail out!" someone shouted. But Vargas saw the tree line below. Too low. Too fast. No parachute would open in time. McKay rotated the turret one last time. Locked on. Held the trigger. The stream of .50 caliber fire caught the 109 directly in the nose. The cockpit disintegrated around Keller in a burst of white fire and red fragments. The fighter split apart in midair and vanished into the forest in a tumbling spiral. Silence filled the intercom. Then screaming. The right engine fire spread rapidly along the nacelle. Flames licked backward along the wing. "Cut it!" Vargas shouted. The prop feathered. The fire died. Barely. They limped west on one engine, 300 feet above the earth, pursued by no one, because no one remained to pursue them. Back at the Belgian strip, Vargas landed hard, left tire collapsing on contact. The aircraft slewed sideways and stopped in a storm of sparks and torn metal. Crews pulled the men from the cockpit with shaking hands. Vargas sat on the concrete afterward, helmet in his lap, staring at nothing. That night, he wrote a single sentence in his notebook. "The Predator bleeds, but it still wins." Pilsen would be rebuilt after the war. So would the forests that swallowed Franz Keller. But for the last weeks of the Third Reich, the sky belonged not to jets or aces, but to fast, low, unstoppable invaders that hunted airfields like animals. And the laughter that once followed their name was never heard again. May 3rd, 1945, 07:14 hours, Lechfeld Air Base, southern Germany. The last operational Luftwaffe airfield in the sector was dying slowly. No sirens wailed anymore. No fighters lined the runway, only burned hangars, empty revetments, and twisted metal where aircraft had once waited for orders that would never come. A few scattered flak crews still manned their guns out of habit more than purpose. They listened to the sky like men waiting for a storm that might never arrive. Then the storm came anyway. 3 A-26 Invaders emerged from the horizon at ground-skimming height, silhouettes growing too fast, too straight. No bombs this time. No need. Just guns. The flak crews fired instinctively. They were answered by a wall of .50 caliber fire that erased the gun pits in less than 3 seconds. Red Halverson flew the center aircraft. 6 weeks of runway killing had burned itself into his hands, into the exact pressure of the yoke, the micro-adjustments in throttle, the timing of every pass. He no longer felt fear in the dive, only precision, only the work. They hit the fuel sheds first, then swept the remaining vehicles. The runway itself was already shattered from previous raids. No need to waste ammunition finishing a corpse. And then they left. No fighters rose, no guns followed, no pursuit formed. For the first time since he'd arrived in Europe, Red realized something quietly terrifying. There was nothing left to hunt. 2 days later, Germany surrendered. Lieutenant Tommy Vargas stood on the wing root of a patched-up invader on a muddy field in Austria, staring at the mountains. His hands no longer shook. That frightened him as much as the battle once had. Some of his squadron would be going home. Some would be transferred to the Pacific. Some would never leave Europe at all. The A-26 beside him bore a dozen repair patches, fresh metal riveted over older scars. The aircraft looked like a survivor. So did he. In his jacket pocket, Vargas carried the same notebook. No more poetic lines now, just dates. Fields hit, losses, survivals, quiet accounting. Predators don't celebrate. They endure. Far across the ruins of Germany, former Lieutenant Karl Weiss walked among the wreckage of an airfield that no longer had a name. He carried a rifle he had never fired in anger. He passed through burnt hangars and cratered runways that would never again feel wheels lift from their surface. The war had taken his sky long before it took his nation. He stopped beside the skeleton of a fighter, half buried in ash, and ran a gloved hand along its shattered wing. "They didn't come to fight us," he murmured. "They came to end us." Karl would live. But the Luftwaffe would not. Historically, the effect of the A-26 Invader on the late war air campaign was devastating in ways even the heavy bombers could not achieve alone. It didn't break cities. It broke reaction time. By destroying airfields faster than fighters could scramble, by turning operational bases into smoking geography in under 2 minutes, the Invader severed the last nerve endings of the German air defense system. Fighters still existed, pilots still lived, but the sky no longer belonged to them. The A-26 flew more than 11,000 combat sorties in Europe. Its losses were low, its damage was annihilating, and its reputation spread faster than any intelligence briefing could follow. In 1947, back in Duluth, Minnesota, Robert Halverson stood on a frozen lake with his young son and watched him try and fail to keep his feet beneath him on skates. The boy laughed. Red did not. Sometimes when the wind cut across the lake just right, the sound of it across the ice reminded him of propellers at low altitude, of vibration through aluminum, of the way the earth rose toward him when he pointed the nose down. At night, he still saw runways, always burning. The Invader would go on to fight in Korea, then in covert wars across half the globe. Its descendants would carry the same DNA of speed, forward firepower, and ground-level brutality into future generations of strike aircraft. But nowhere, not before and not after, would it ever again arrive as such a complete surprise. Because once, in the final months of the Second World War, German pilots laughed at the A-26 Invader, until it started obliterating airfields in minutes. Then they stopped laughing, and the runways never recovered.